Welcome back to Sad Framecisco. Didi and Jemma are back to talk about another movie. This time it's the 2008 mumblecore romance by Barry Jenkins, Medicine for Melancholy, which deals with gentrification and the shrinking Black demographic of San Francisco. And I stand corrected. In the last episode of Sad Framecisco, I said that I Love Boosters was the first movie to portray market rate housing in a negative light. But as it turns out, Medicine for Melancholy did it first. I have to thank Snurpy and my friends at Eating for Free for subscribing at patreon.com/sadfrancisco, which helps me pay my bills. If you go there to patreon.com/sadfrancisco, you can also get some merch like a hat or a bag or some Tabi socks in exchange for your subscription. Thank you so much to everyone who is donating there. By the way, the first voice you're about to hear is Jemma, then it's me, and then it's Didi talking about Medicine for Melancholy.
We got to get these intros up energy-wise.
Should we do a breathing exercise?
Well, you know what? We're talking about a mumblecore film today, so
That's
I think
true.
it can suffice that we're very I'm really down.
Fits. It really
Like,
fits.
what are we doing? What's it like to be a Black person in San Francisco? You know what I mean?
We could go around and say what this movie is about in a sentence. To me, this movie is about complicating Black representation in mass media or within the context of the mumblecore genre.
To me, this was something of an indie Love Jones 2000s remake, reflecting, even if unintentionally, on the prison house of heterosexuality, with San Francisco as a convenient backdrop.
I also want to emphasize the mumble. I think it's about a kind of non-interruptive Black sociality in San Francisco and kind of a muffled grievance politics. Yeah, so that's what I would say it's about.
Well, do you want to start by talking about
It's more
what
grand.
mumblecore was?
Sure. I like what mumblecore was. I mean, there probably is a formal history of it. We could also just kind of jump in about it, and people can add, because I think this is a film, I'm putting it in quotes for everyone listening on the audio movement, and that I don't really think mumblecore was, it's not like it had a professed set of tenets or beliefs or anything. It was more just a formal style that kind of developed with, out of more so Gen X filmmakers. And related to this film, it was kind of a post-collegiate or post-college genre, very similar to like in the 90s films. There would be parallels to what people who I guess would be kind of like late boomers made. So Slacker in the 90s, or a movie I watched to prepare for this thinking it would be more related was Whit Stillman's Metropolitan, which is all about post-college grads. So a lot of the films are about particularly white, particularly middle class, in some cases maybe more upper class, white people kind of dealing with the malaise of having just graduated from college. Some it could be any kind of college. I think with Richard Linklater, maybe it was always kind of like somewhere in Texas, like maybe UT or something. And then obviously on the East Coast, there was a lot of kind of Ivies or near the Ivies, like Noah Baumbach, who went to Vassar. A lot of films were about people from Vassar. You see that in Francis Ha, that's jumping ahead to kind of the end of mumblecore. But so there's a direct link with those two, obviously, since I think they're still married. So yeah, mumblecore came out of kind of the 90s. I don't know what else to call it, sort of slacker. I don't think I would quite call it youth culture, but it did have kind of this proximity to, the sort of then younger 20-something generation, 20-something, maybe 30-something generation. So very similar to what happened with movies in the 90s, like I said, like Slackers or even Metropolitan, very different films, or Clerks, which is a very clear early influence on a lot of mumblecore. I think Clerks comes out in 1994 or something like that. And mumblecore is something that is more directly rooted in the 2000s. A lot of people would locate the first mumblecore film as this film called Funny Haha, which is Bujalski, who did movies later that were not in the style of mumblecore. He still makes movies, which I actually like his more recent movies. I don't like the mumble. I can't stand Funny. A lot of people would characterize it as sort of naturalism or naturalist camera work and naturalist dialogue. So all I mean by that is the idea that this is the way people naturally speak. There is a sense of embedded realness in it. So like another big film actually that was influential, less to what we watched, but more so on the New York side, was Larry Clark's Kids, which I'm sure, I don't know, Tosha, you probably would have also seen that when you were younger, as I did. Maybe not too young because it was supposed to be very R-rated or whatever with
I
closed
came to
7
it late, but yeah, I mean, Harmony, Corinne, like those filmmakers, I mean, that was like huge with like the alt kids in high school.
Yeah, and so those were big, a lot of them were about like, again, and this is in quotes for people not watching, this is what teenagers are really like, or this is what life is really like. So there's also a kind of very essential realism to it. A lot of this, and we could also, in the Constantine in New York, there's a whole photography movement around this and stuff. Toshio, since you're a journalist, like Dash Snow, that kind of scene of people in the late 90s, early 2000s, like the Lower East Side. Hipsters, we're kind of getting into hipsters, so we're getting
Vice magazine.
Yeah, Vice was, I don't know if you would know the history more than I would. I don't think Vice was quite around, but it's very much that generation who, the mumblecore directors are very much the same generation as the people founding all those kinds of things like Vice. So there's a lot of kind of realness culture. It has a lot of, which this also could be a San Francisco thing to talk about. It also kind of has a almost like this generations of beat culture. I mean, the hipster is also very connected to beat culture, which maybe we'll talk about too, because it doesn't feel like a hipster is a thing anymore. So there's a lot of that kind of wayward stream of consciousness. This also has to go to the naturalism sort of dialogue or observations. There's only apparently a couple improvisations in this movie. I listened to an interview where he talked about it. But generally speaking, there is the quality of improvising or the appearance of improvising in a lot of mumblecore, whether there actually is or not. Unfortunately, depending how you look at it, two of the biggest kind of influences for this period of, or in general for independent American film, white American New York film, are Cassavetes, who's amazing, who no one can compare to in these, and the other one, of course, being T.W. Woody Allen, right? If you've ever seen a Woody Allen movie, you can also kind of see the neurotic observations of things in life. And there's a engagement in a lot of other mumblecore films with like therapy or therapy speak, maybe we would call it now. So that all kind of funnels into people sort of, I wouldn't quite call them doing impressions of Cassavetes and Woody Allen, but a lot of the camera work, the dialogue, the slice of life observations. We could get into some of the other conventions of the genre maybe when we go into the movie itself, but a lot of it was kind of rooted in these things.
So it sounds like 90s is when you're placing the beginning.
I think people would say
movement.
Early 2000s. Funny Haha is 2002. So people would say the 2000s. I think because the 90s, you still have all those filmmakers like Whit Stillman or Hal Hartley is a good example of someone. And he was still kind of a thing in the 90s. Noah Baumbach is still kind of a thing in the 90s. And then some of those guys, they just get bigger. Or in the case of Noah Baumbach, they kind of get bigger checks and they get to make more movies. Like I think around the time this movie was made, like The Squid and the Whale, these kind of bigger budget movies had come out. I think another way to look at a lot of mumblecore is that it was kind of like an audition tape or a quote unquote proof of concept. Like they were very much kind of like when people talk about hip hop as like underground and, there were people that were just really engaged with whatever the style was. And then there were people who were kind of auditioning to make it into the mainstream. And I think that's very obvious with people like Greta Gerwig or Barry Jenkins who, go on to make movies that aren't at all mumblecore, and in both their cases, big Hollywood productions. I don't know if Barbie was Disney, but the Mustafa one was. So, yeah.
When would you say it peaked and, like kind of left the theaters?
That's a good question. So Rallo's not with us. Rallo had this theory. She felt the last one was Tiny Furniture, the Lena Dunham movie. I think that's 2010. But I think the film Weekend by Andrew Hay. I want to say that's 2011. That comes out. I think Francis Ha's 2012. I would call that mumblecore too, or kind of it's starting to move into something else. So I would kind of say 2012, 2013. I think Rollo pegged it at the beginning of the show Girls. I will also say another thing that's interesting to bring up is a lot of mumblecore people move into TV. There's Lena Dunham. Who else is there? There's someone else who moved into TV that I was like, oh, this is what's their name? Who did Transparent? Mark Duplass. Yeah, he did an early one called The Puffy Chair in 2005. And we can also talk about, I think another big feature of this genre too is like basic things are really difficult, like getting groceries, which maybe is, I mean, I think we could talk about the politics of that, maybe related to techies too, and like the kind of class stuff around that too, that it was really never about big things. I'm putting this in scare quotes, which is also something unique about this movie that they talk about social issues more. So I would say maybe 2012, 2013, 2014, somewhere around there.
Yeah, I think we should talk about the politics of it, since this is generally a political podcast. And with mumblecore, I mean, you mentioned, that social issues were more directly addressed with the movie we're about to get into. But I think of it as attempting to do something that's apolitical.
Yeah. And a lot of it is kind of, now we have the term autofiction, but it kind of has this idea, which is unfortunately has like one in cinema. But I think it's very related to, this is a political thing. It's like a Lauren Berlant, kind of question. It's like, it very much is like, well, I'm doing myself. You can't comment on that. I think also some of it, to your point, was to get away from not only politics, but kind of a moral judgment. Like a lot of it was like, we all do this. Again, you less see it in this. I think race has a big reason, but a lot of it was white people acting really evil. I mean, I would even, again, and if you've ever seen Girls, I think people kind of have a sense of this because there's, it's a popular show in it. And a lot of white women, I mean, I think you have a lot of like white women doing racist thing in movie. And it's like, oh, well, don't we all kind of do this? And this is just me sort of, and it's also very connected to narrative writing too. I don't know if you remember McSweeney's, but that was like a big moment too in the 2000s, was like the creative fiction moment. And it's like, if anyone ever saw that Chronology of Water movie, that kind of reminded me of the context of mumblecore. But yeah, it's very like, I'm just doing me. I'm trying to get through college or after college. I don't need your judgments, and, I don't need your politics, and everything is yeah, you kind of see that in the 90s, but it's worse, I think, by the 2000s, for sure.
I do think of it as being a pretty white genre. And so this movie was like unique in that it wasn't that. This movie, it almost feels like it's an attempt to get some like representation within the genre.
I think it's the Adventures in Moving Going interview on Criterion. There's a moment where Barry Jenkins basically is reflecting on the sort of circuitous path that he took to becoming a filmmaker. And the person interviewing him is bringing it back up, the president or like the head of CEO of Criterion, no less. And it's like, am I bad at making movies because I grew up Black and poor? And I think also like in the South. And in some ways, I think in some of the conversations, as you're saying, relative to his intervention in some ways into like the general field of mumblecore, it's in part an insistence that we can do the same thing. But one of the things that stood out to me, because I was watching it on a DVD on the disc version, it had a bunch of like trailers for other IFC films. And I was like, what is this? And many of them, now that you've given the explanation, because it's like, that was not my time period. I was like 11, 10 when this came out. And I was like, what are these? Like, these look like home videos and they're being distributed with IFC. And then, he's talking in his interview. There's also an interview from the London Film Festival at the Filmmakers Breakfast when this was doing its festival round. And he talks about, like, someone brings up Joe Swanberg, and he also talks about Joe Swanberg being someone who's, influenced some of the stuff that he was doing even if he was trying not to. He said he intentionally tried not to watch Swanberg films before because he knew that it would almost get like over-determined by that sort of mumblecore kind of space. But when I was just doing a sketch of research to try to catch myself up on, what exactly this whole mumblecore thing was, I mean, there's like whole web pages dedicated to chronicling mumblecore. And of course, Barry Jenkins is nowhere to be found. But that's the other thing, is that there's just not the same apparatus in terms of circulation and distribution and being able to support and sustain filmmakers that are not white and actors that are not white to be able to kind of continue on with that. Like, I mean, even Wyatt Cenac. Yeah, I was like, I know some CU things going on. Yeah. Wyatt Cenac and then Tracy Higgins. Tracy Higgins, it seemed like was in very few things after this. And like the things that she was in were like fairly minor roles in like, real strange happenings, like a 50 Cent movie, I think, like that. And then ensemble-ish character in one of the Twilight films. So it's night and day. And still in some of the interviews, Barry Jenkins really tries to insist that there's some sort of meritocracy, while at the same time talking about how being on the panel at Telluride, which he also called a meritocracy, he would get to the point where he realized he had never, I think it was either never screened a Black filmmaker or never screened a Black woman filmmaker in the shorts category, which he helps program. And he was saying he realized that it was because like the screeners weren't even getting him any films. Like by the time things got, siphoned down to what the actual screeners watched, there were no films by Black women that would get passed on to him to program. So it's like things like that. But you're trying to say it's like a meritocracy, and you're also like, yeah, but then even in 4 or 5 years, the screeners would never even pass these things on to me. And the same thing, like in that interview with Criterion, he like brings up, oh yeah, there's not really very many, if any, Black films in Criterion's collection. And before, you could say in the early days, Criterion wasn't the vetting institution. It took the films that were already vetted. But he was saying now you are more so tastemakers. People go to Criterion first. They don't go to, Locarno, and they don't go to Venice and whatnot. They don't go to Cannes and then go back. The general populace, like Film Insider, sure, are still doing those things. But he was saying, most people are going to go straight to you. So now that you all are the tastemakers, what's up with the Black movies? And I'm like, so you're sitting here trying to maybe convince yourself this is a meritocracy and that, it is really mumblecore. Like anybody can do this. Because I think that's the thing about like that kind of home video sort of aesthetic to it. And that improvisational thing is like, well, anybody can do it. But no, it's like this sort of political economy of the, film apparatus.
Anyone can do it, but then there's a certain crowd that decides who gets to see it or its distribution.
Yeah, I think it was very like to what your brother's saying. He says this in interviews because he's like, oh, it only costs $13,000, which is impressive. I mean, I think you can make a movie that much if people volunteer and they shot it in 15 days, that's fairly quick, which actually is something we should talk about too. I think exactly what you're saying, the paradox of it, Didi, is like anyone can shoot a movie, but then you still have to pursue in an idealized way these sort of pathways. It's also worth mentioning, because I think this is that this is still kind of the festival circuit when people think, because things like Slacker or Clerks, broke through festivals and things, people kind of thought that's the way you're gonna make a movie. I mean, even things like Frameline to a degree were for queer filmmakers, to pick a local reference. Now it's not really Frameline's not a pipeline, I don't think. And this doesn't exist in general. I mean, there really is no independent cinema anymore because of things like A24. He keeps talking about how they shot it in 15 days, which if you're using film, that was pretty unheard of. Most people it would be like 40 days would be a quick movie. And another thing that mumblecore does is that it expedites the shooting schedule, which is also something, of course, digital filmmaking does, which is also a really common aesthetic in mumblecore, is that like, oh, I use digital instead of film. And not to romanticize film, but I do think shooting movies faster. I mean, he repeats it a lot, and like you're saying in interviews, he's like, we shot it in 15 days. That becomes a really common way to frame your films in the 2000s. Like, I shot him for 15 days and under this amount of money, and it's basically like a business card to the industry. Like, hey, I can do the back end. I mean, to use it like an industry kind of framing language, right? I can do these back end things that will, turn out products quicker and cheaper than other people. And it's not so much talked about that way because of, the feelings of art or whatever that are on top of it. But it absolutely was a lot of its selling point. But it is about integrating into these pipelines that reward you if you're one of the few.
I mean, in 2026, there is a lot of chatter about obsession and backrooms. There was a movie called Iron Lung that came out in January that was by this YouTuber, Markiplier. And the idea is like, oh, now people are able to get these audiences for their filmmaking online, on social media, and they have the upper hand when it comes to the studios. I think that there's critique of that because it's still ultimately a bunch of Zionists who run things and ultimately can decide to, for example, the Oscar-winning documentary from a couple of years ago around Palestine was kept out of the movie theater distribution circuit. It does seem like the film festival circuit is, like you said, Jemma, like not the proving ground that it once was, or not the place that is minting millionaires and creating the new kings of cinema necessarily. But we should talk about, Barry Jenkins. So like Moonlight is probably Barry Jenkins' most known work. And we were talking about this, Jemma, like he didn't spend that much time in San Francisco, but he was able to capture a lot of San Francisco that you don't necessarily see in movies about San Francisco or set in San Francisco. What else do we know about this director?
Florida State. I think the story that's like most commonly heard is that he was studying to be an English teacher. He went to Florida State without any intention of becoming a filmmaker, but then is told by a writing instructor in a course that he was taking that the work that he, submitted for a workshop was very visual, if not cinematic. The film school at Florida State was located in the football stadium, is the way that he narrates it. And the football team had its own separate cafeteria, but regular students could go in there on Friday. They were allowed to go into the cafeteria for football players on Fridays, and he had been going regularly. And then after being given this comment about the, visual and cinematic nature of his writing by his professor, he sees the advertisement flyer for the film school and then ends up applying. He talks about being in there for like the first year and then feeling super out of his depths and deciding to like take a year off in the middle of the program and just like try to baptize by fire with the film library that was also there, and talked about kind of going through a divergence from other classmates because he wasn't watching the films that were being assigned in that year, where he was starting to feel like everybody's films kind of like were starting to look the same and feel the same, and decides to kind of like go off on a limb and explore some of the other kind of depths of things, and was saying that he really tried to take this approach of much older filmmakers having like a breadth of references to get a variety of inspiration and kind of move from there. And then his first short is about like a post 9/11 Arab family who's like washing American flags called My Josephine. I think it's on YouTube and Vimeo. And listening to that, I think you get this sense of, some of the liberalness of Barry's politics, because he's like talking about it and he's like, well, I was trying to respond to people saying that at post 9/11, Arab is the new black. And so, he does clearly have this particular like intrigue and investment in thinking through the politics of race and blackness. But I'm curious about those references, if he was doing that homework while he was in that library. I don't know how much of that was going on. We'll get into that more when we really get into the film, but I think it betrays quite a bit. And so I think when people talk about the kind of pitfalls or the shortcomings sometimes of just trying to build the politics solely on, personal experience, I think that's when you really get into the slippery slopes.
I think this is kind of related to that. There's two filmmakers he constantly cites. One is Wong Kar-wai, who is almost a total stylist. And I think that's one of the reasons that film you're talking about, the laundry one, looks like Happy Together. And it's like very languid. And you kind of have to use big symbols like the American flag washing, which is frankly unforgivable. And it is just kind of a problematic argument, to put it lightly. It's like, oh, Arab Americans aren't American, which is, it kind of fits into San Francisco as far as a kind of neoliberal argument. But it does look a lot like Wong Kar-wai. And the other person he references, which is funny because this is a totally the opposite filmmaker of Wong Kar-wai, is Claire Denis, who has really interesting politics. And all her films, I would say, have a very interesting visual articulation of power. And I can see why I would love her films, but I don't see any of that in his films.
One thing that I wrote down, which is again is intriguing in terms of this navigation of politics. I think this was in Romanticism movie going. He talks about Breathless, I think, being one of the first films that he watched. And then he says he goes from Godard to Truffaut to then, Wong Kar-wai. But then also talks about Ratcatcher by Lynn Ramsey, which makes me want to actually, I'm curious about, the kind of situation there. But I'm like, even just looking at the background that's given for that in terms of like a sanitation worker, like a trash collection strike, it's a question of, I'm curious about seeing it because I'm wondering if that is just backdrop, because like San Francisco really is more so backdrop. Gentrification, I find in the film, is backdrop more than anything. The other thing about Ratcatcher is that he talks so much about atmosphere when he's talking about seeing that film, when being able to like not have film just be a two-dimensional thing. But I do think that in some ways the formal and the aesthetic invention, to what extent the shots and things like that are that innovative is, certainly a question mark. But I do think there's like a fair amount of homage in some of the shots. But that is in some ways his effort of trying to think through the politics without really having a vocabulary for it. So it's like a way of almost like working around it. And at the very least, I can appreciate the honesty in that regard, because with Medicine for Melancholy, for example, he does say that, they super saturated it. And I'm like really curious about how, because he said they shot on a Panasonic HVX, so it's not film, but he said they shot it super saturated, then selectively desaturated. And then also he talks about the choice to shoot in 720 instead of 1080. So that they could have longer takes and things of that matter, which is, I think, again, what you're getting at, Jemma, about this kind of question of even just like production schedule, like flirting with film, flirting with the actual production that goes into film. I did appreciate some of the commentary in that regard around him talking about like shooting in various places where he just did not have permits. So it's like, it's so strange. It's so strange to have him go from, in some ways, like a sort of run and gun kind of DIY practice to then, was it like a decade later or so? Moonlight's like 2018?
2016.
2016, okay, yeah. Yeah, it's just, it's surprising. It's something for sure.
I do think of atmosphere and style as being like particularly important to mumblecore as a genre, like creating atmosphere to the point where you can create a movie where you can have it on in the background and get a vibe from it.
Vibes.
And
this is the era of vibes too.
We're in 2008. This is probably like just before Obama was elected. when the movie was made. And I think atmosphere-wise, it does capture that moment, like the hipsters in plaid. There's like the fixed gear bike. He's wearing like the bike messenger outfit, like with the little hat cap with the short bill. And
Did you have one, Tosh? Were you riding fixie?
I didn't have one of those hats, but everybody wanted to be on a fixie for sure. And now the bike messenger has been totally rendered obsolete, unfortunately.
No, there's still a few to proud.
Oh, good.
A few
Good
out there. I see him downtown Oakland all the time.
Good to hear.
I mean, it's like 8 of them, so that's why you see them all the time, because they're ferrying things between all the buildings.
Well, it feels very vintage, and I think it's a good portrayal of that time. I'd only been in the city for a couple of years, but it captured for me some of that era with the coffee culture. Like they go to a cafe at the beginning, somebody orders a double macchiato.
Another big thing we have to mention is the music, right? Because it was also, mumblecore was like indie bands were happening, especially in New York and here. It was like, oh, my friends can do the soundtrack. When music became super copyrighted in the 90s, I think, and you just can't have any music. The algorithms that they make here can search people's movies, on YouTube, as why we probably couldn't play clips of this movie. And be like, no, take down. So, one way around that was like, my friend's indie band is going to do the soundtrack and they'll be, make it big, which it must have happened. I don't know if any indie bands came from the mumblecore movies, but that was part of that moment as well, of course.
I think of Juno and Moldy Peaches they popped off much bigger as a result of the movie Juno, which to me is very mumblecore. The soundtrack's certainly a huge part of creating the atmosphere, and it's a lot of like lo-fi instrumentation is what I associate with the genre.
Yeah, one of the notes that I took is that it reminded me of recently rewatching, because I was again too young for when it actually came out. But Noah's Ark, because at the end of every episode, it'd be like, whoever's music was like playing in the credits, they would put like the photo of the album cover and then like the information to like their MySpace or, their blog spot or whatever it was, that where you could find it. And that's, again, was watching it on the DVD version that I have. So at the end, as the credits roll, each song, there's like a thumbnail and then the like credit information, but then also like a website, like, you're going to scribe down that URL in the theater, which is really funny. It's like, I guess, there's DVD at that point. So I guess they're hoping that you're going to get the DVD copy, you're going to rent it, and then you're going to pause it at the end and take down the information and make sure that you can, follow that band.
Another thing that I think about, we talked about the genre kind of like concluding after 2010-ish. Like for me, once the genre and the characters started to become like satirized, like Portlandia, like
Premium Rush,
Pacific Northwest generally. Premium Rush was amazing. Bike Messenger movie.
It was like a big budget Bike Messenger movie, yeah.
Yeah, I jumped the shark with things like Premium Rush, where Joseph Gordon-Levitt plays a bike messenger. In any case, should we talk about the actual movie? Style, atmosphere, that'll come up again, but
we got to deal with the atmosphere.
Oh,
it's
absolutely.
A very atmospheric film.
For sure. Yeah, when we start, they're hungover in
Bernal.
Castro.
It's Bernal, baby.
Okay, Bernal.
I used to live there, yeah.
Bernal Heights, a roommate wearing plaid comes out, a white dude.
Yeah, that's an important detail. And it's a big house.
Not a roommate.
He's the house owner.
The host.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's a really fancy house. I think it's on Alabama.
Because I was trying to figure out, I'm like, they're brushing their teeth with their fingers, but like, this is a nice ass crib. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
It's a straight guy too. This is the heterosexuality comment you're saying. You go to a straight man's house, he got one towel,
one flannel, and like, this is pre-Amazon. So, maybe he's got like the t-shirt from the tech job underneath the flannel. So yeah, two strangers meet, hook up, at a party at some rich white guy's house in Bernal.
Probably the
And
west side, maybe the southish side.
they grab a coffee.
They
know
walk
a
up
place.
Bernal Hill.
I know a place.
Yeah, and it is,
Just over
and he
there in
says it's
Noe.
in Noe, which you know what? I am embarrassed to admit this. I go to Noe Valley sometimes often. I think I'm the only person I've ever met who's not in their 60s. I've never seen another Black person in Noe Valley except for once, and she was very nice and she complimented my outfit. And if you would not see, but we could also get into that as a thematic of the movie too, where I'm like, if I see a Black person in Noe, it's like seeing a Black person at MOMA, which we'll talk about the museum later. I know they're not going to say hi to me, and it's just a certain kind of Black person that I don't want to talk to because they're going to have a lot. You catch them with their white partner or whatever. So I'm not gonna say it's totally unbelievable because there is like a very heavy rent control block of like apparently has the most rent controlled units, I think, or the longest. It might have the longest rent control occupancy or something like that. Someone told me this a few years ago. But it did feel a little out of nowhere because I don't know.
Yeah, see, okay, but part of the like missing piece of the introduction is that it's like his first words to her is like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," basically, like, "I'm so sorry about last night," and it was like, "Okay, yeah, what's that about?"
Yeah.
That was the very first thing I was like, 'cause in my head, this is supposed to be like a romantic kind
Yeah.
of like movie, like a romantic drama sort of thing. But I'm always skeptical about that when it's a straight movie, especially a Black heterosexual romance. There's always something to praise, and this is why I say it feels like an indie like 2000s reboot of Love Jones, because I remember that being like really cast to me, and I hadn't seen it before I went to college, and like there were so many people. It's like, of course, sort of performance of Blackness in this particular PWI that I was at. So everybody's like, I had these like very run of the mill like Black movies that were their favorites, like Love and Basketball, Love Jones,
And they
things
got
like
back
that.
to those were on streaming at the time, I think, for your
Yeah,
generation.
on
So that's also how they became
Netflix,
a thing. And I
Hulu
was like, those
down,
were
Brown
terrible.
Sugar. Yeah,
Yeah, they were
yeah,
terrible movies. Love Jones is a
exactly.
horrible
Yeah,
movie. Like they're just,
and
but it's people
especially.
weirdly nostalgic because that level of production doesn't exist anymore.
Mhm.
Anyway, yeah.
But even as like a romance or something, it's like I want to love like Love Jones. I was like, did y'all watch the same
Yeah.
movie? He took her address off a check she wrote at a record store. That's a stalker.
Yeah.
You're I mean, it's like the same thing that happens here, like really at the best unsavory sexual encounter.
Yeah.
Then he's basically like imposing himself on her the entire film. And even like he kind of gets around it with, this is where I say like indie, because he didn't have to
The
steal her
purse or
address
whatever.
from, yeah, it's like
Yeah.
not a purse, that's a
A
wallet,
wallet,
sir.
sir.
The
Yeah.
wallet,
Yeah.
the wallet that she leaves behind in the taxi that the taxi driver points out to him because Wyatt, could not pay for the taxi, and he
Yeah.
was trying to flex and be like, "Oh yeah, like I live in the same neck of the woods."
Yeah.
Yeah, the gender
Yeah.
politics of this era, it feels
Yeah,
like
we should talk about them.
we had the Riot Girl movement late 90s, and then it switched back a bit. There's the backlash. I think of things as being so gendered in like the hipster scenes of Portland where I was living at the time.
Yeah, I think one thing is also helpful to mention, which I realize it having now watched it had been on my list forever, and I'm shocking that I hadn't seen it. But he claims this is based on Claire Denis' Friday Night, which it is a movie about a one night stand. I mean, she's never made a mumblecore movie, thankfully, but it's not as there's not a lot of words in Friday Night relatively. So it also is like you're saying, it's a weird transposition because there's things you could look at Friday Night and be like, oh, is that like a non-consensual interaction or something? But generally it's more about kind of trying to capture the feelings involved in it in a way that I think this is trying to do. But to your point, I think it does also have to be said, a feature of mumblecore is, I would say, violently heterosexual and patriarchal dynamics that actually I think cut both ways. I mean, we get really racist white women like Lena Dunham or a lot of Greta Gerwig characters. But you see in the beginning a lot of really fucked up straight male, white male behavior that's like, I hate my girlfriend, my bitch girlfriend. And particularly what you'll get is that a lot of the men in the movies, very hipster too, kind of misogyny, are like, oh, I'm nothing, and she's like has a job, or the girl actually has, in her case, she's living in a nice part of the city. She's living in the Marina. I mean, I don't want to jump ahead too much, and he's kind of a loser. It's kind of like about the loser guy's revenge. Weirdly, there's a lot of like animosity.
Loser, number two aquarium salesman in the city.
Yeah, so it is kind of like about the guy always having like not a job, but generally the guy in the movie is kind of he's a slacker loser type of guy. And even if the woman is like in Funny Haha, she's like paying for her boyfriend's everything and he's trying to get his band started. And that, how many of us know straight people from the 2000s, but that is a really common dynamic with straight people is the woman be like, oh, it's okay. I took out some payday loans. They ruined my credit. They come to take my legs, but he really got to get his rap career out, and it's like that dynamic it's not as present here as in other mumblecore movies, but it's very central to these movies. And even when you kind of brought up Love Jones too, I think that also very much flows through Black romance movies. But yeah, the kind of weird wounded male ego persona is very common to mumblecore, and he definitely has that in this. It's not even, I don't think that's really debatable. He's like, oh, I'm such a loser, I'm just a bite. It's like, okay.
And then Juno decides to keep the baby at the end of that movie and put it up for adoption, carry it to term instead of getting the abortion. And it is
Michael Cera is a good one of those loser got care, like, oh, I can't. And you ever meet a straight woman, they love him down. They're like, oh my god, he can't even change his clothing. Oh my god, he peed his pants. That's so hot. Like everything. He don't shower. Just all these things. It's
the woman has to be the mom in the relationship as well.
In a way that feels worse than 50s movies. Like, can we say that? Because like the 50s, you're like, at least this guy got a suit on. He got a job. And I think you also get the kind of weird 2000s sex wars, which, Toshio, you probably remember this from journalism, where you'd have all these like Bitch Magazine, Everyday Feminists, all these things that were like, I fucking hate my boyfriend. You now see it online, of course. It's one of the reasons these don't exist anymore. Where it's like, I fucking hate my boyfriend. He, cheated on me with my sister and he's, on the couch playing Call of Duty and you're like, why are you writing about this person? Just leave them. Like it almost, you feel insane. You're like, what? Like, what is wrong with
men? Hatred of men was a big thing, but you're right. Yeah. Like,
but you want to be with
staying with them. Yeah.
Yes,
staying with them regardless.
And because otherwise you would just be like, oh, he was terrible. I left that guy.
In this movie, it's a little bit, it complicates that idea a bit more because it seems like Angela, aka Joanne Hardwick, she knows why she's with her art curator man.
White. Do I even have to
white
ask
man.
what he is?
Yeah. Curator with no art on the wall. Which
minimalist aesthetics,
Apparently that came from the house they shot in. I did not need to do this much research. Where he said, so they shot in the Marina. It's actually really close to where we did the stairs scene for our movie. I don't know if Toshio, you were there. And he said his wife was an art collector and the guy was going through a divorce. And so he intentionally made his place very Spartan to spite the wife. I don't know. This is just not an important fact. But there you go.
The more you know. But see, I mean, to what you were saying earlier, I mean, one of the things that he does mention in terms of like his impetus for the film is like, oh yeah, like I was going through a breakup, or like I was I was down bad.
That's
true.
And that's
why I made the movie. I said, oh, okay, sure, sure. I think a part of it is this sort of notion or sense that what is like very strange behavior, and like in spite of her very clear efforts to like not engage with him, that he just keeps insisting on his own presence and like the necessity of his own presence. And I meant to bring this up when we were still kind of talking more about the beginning, something that was really interesting about, and again, to what extent it's intentional, who knows, but that the question that they're asked, like the white guy kind of stops him as they're going out the house and he's like, where y'all going? And he's just like, we're just getting out of here. And that's like very much how the movie goes. It's just like them meandering. And
that's very mumblecore. I would say.
Yeah, like that is, yeah, it feels very
It's
quintessential.
like our generation, it's so lost. We have no actual things that are real
Exactly.
problems to fight anymore. It's just like, hey man, it's, like, God, it's hard to pick out a t-shirt. You ever notice that?
They do like mark themselves as like distinct from each other as characters when Angela asks Micah if he is the kind of person that goes around telling people that Black History Month is in February because it's the shortest month. And she reveals that she has more depth of knowledge than like we're initially meant to think, I guess. As she is somebody who she changed her first name from Joanne to Angela. Is that supposed to have a whitening effect?
Or Angela Davis? I don't know. What was the reference?
Yeah, I don't know. But in any case, she says it's related to Frederick Douglass, that it came to be
Douglas.
in February.
Like, who's I never talked about Black History Month with another Black person. Who gives a shit? Like, are you serious?
Okay, just very briefly, I thought she just gave the fake name because she didn't want him to stalk her. Like, look her up on MySpace.
Yes.
Anyway.
You're so right. You're so right.
Like,
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, it's like so silly. It's so ridiculous. I mean, also, I mean, to go through this sort of just very misogynistic, and also like admittedly, like in some ways, like anti-Black in a way that I don't particularly think is like, oh, I don't want to go in like the bell hook school of feminism and be like, oh, a Black person couldn't be living in the Marina, but like that's his kind of take. It's like, oh no, you don't live here. It's like
it's 90s Black
like,
culture war shit. Like
they're like girl boss too, where like even if and I think it's like plays on that because like she doesn't have a job and she just like has, and it's actually kind of like an inversion of what you're describing of like the mumblecore tropes, because it's actually like she's the kind of like deadbeat partner. Like she doesn't have a job. She just prints t-shirts with the last names of women directors on them. And then she has like what Barbara Loden on her.
Yeah, that was strange. Because I mean, that's another early naturalist film, like Cassavetes era of like Barbara Loden's Wanda, which I don't know if anyone listening to this has seen it. It's it's a good movie, but it's also one of those, which goes to show you how far, to Toshio's early question, where it's like it deals with poverty, sexual assault, like how difficult it is for women to and poor people. None of that in mumblecore. I guess. But see, I also I read her as being kind of successful in a way, right? Because she kind of embodies art, right, or Black art, because she's like wearing a, the Barbara Loden shirt. Okay, Barbara Loden's white, but it's also a very hipster
got a
thing.
white
Of course,
partner.
she got a white partner who's an art dealer, so she has like a proximity to the art world or curator, whatever. Like, and then she proposed going to the MOAD, which I mean.
No, she said MOMA, and then he takes her.
Oh,
yeah,
right. Okay.
Yeah, he's like, huh. Yeah, because it's like the whole exchange which I wrote down, where he's like, MOMA. He's like, do you want to go to MOMA? Or she says, let's go to MOMA. He says, I don't want to go to MOMA. She says, why not? He says, no comment. And then she asks, like, what do two Black people do on a Sunday afternoon? And he's like, what do two Black people not do on a Sunday afternoon? And then his whole thing is like to take her to MOAD. But then like that, and that's the whole farce of it all, because I was just like refreshing on this because I'm like, isn't MOAD just another one of those sort of like art washing projects? And I was like, yes, confirmed, because it was like San Francisco Redevelopment Agency. Yeah. So for him to supposedly be this, anti-gentrification personal, crusader, for him to be like, where we need to go is the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency Black art washing building.
I have to say, Rallo was the one who pointed out this actually as a she didn't want to be on this podcast or wasn't able to. And I thought this was the best thing is like, she's like, one thing that always pissed me off about this scene is that MOAD, and in general about MOAD, is that it never had a free day until more recently. I think maybe COVID. It didn't have free days, which, like MOMA will have like first Saturday is free if you have like food stamps or something. MOAD never had that, which felt so wildly anti-black. Like, it was like, oh, we're not about to have you kind of people up in here. This is for some white people and Asian, and of course, rich Asian people too. We want, but you and rich black people. But if you got on that food stamps, get you waiting on the street. Like, there's a museum down the street, and that was the case during this time, as far as I'm aware. So it just feels so extra, to your point, like fake authentic, which I guess is how a lot of people like this are. But it is like,
I mean, it's something like someone like Barry Jenkins, who's just like, I don't even know how he ends up here. Like, why San Francisco?
I think he kind of wanted to get away from LA, which is also how people use San Francisco, like in films.
Yeah,
I mean,
San Francisco, Oakland,
it's like, oh, well, it's too fake, or there's too much pressure.
He has some redevelopment related art on his wall in his tiny Tenderloin apartment. Of course, at one point, San Francisco was something like 20% black, and he laments that they're down to 7% at the time. I think now it's like closer to 5, I want to say. London Breed said she was going to take care of that, but she, in fact...
She didn't say how. She didn't tell you.
Right. She said, I'll get the rest of them out.
Which,
she's like 5%, we could get to 0.
I know. Yep. And then, as you mentioned earlier, Jemma, there's the moment when we get Tommi Avicolli Mecca, who works at Housing Rights Committee here in town, is a longtime anti-gentrification activist here in the city. And I was wrong. I said that I Love Boosters was the first time that market rate housing was depicted in a negative light in a movie, because we do get some commentary on market rate housing being colonization. But there's that scene where we get a bunch of activists talking about gentrification. That's kind of inserted. I think the visual, it's a little bit more colorful during that scene.
Yeah, because I think that's when they're like walking to Rainbow, they're like walking to the grocery store, and then they do kind of a cut in to this store, and then inside the store is them having this like all white people, mind you, having this conversation about gentrification and like the eastern portion of San Francisco, just disappearing, and like the incursion and everything that's going to happen with that. I mean, what's really intriguing about this is that for as much as politics is effaced, it is, particularly present, because it's like one of the first conversations they have is that kind of question of like, well, what do you do for work? And like, how do you afford like the place where you live?
I like that.
But which is not the common filmic question. And I think, in your sort of rom-com-ish genre, usually some question about work does come up, but it's usually expressed in different ways. It's usually not the direct address.
Which feels very San Francisco to me, because, I mean, it's so expensive. It's like, what scam are you running to be able to afford to live here?
And the Marina, because the Marina is such old money. Like, not that you could be young and live there, and it's very white. I mean, it is very like, I've never personally met anyone who lives in the Marina. And I really like the Tommi part. I mean, I think that is cool. And I saw an interview where someone asked him about that scene, and he was like, I had to have that scene in there. Which I was like, I kind of respected that. Some people would consider that a break from the conventions. I don't know if it's supposed to be an actual group. I couldn't tell what space it was, but it looked like a storefront. Maybe it was 518. And so I liked that in it. I know people could be like, well, y'all hate everything. I internalized that so much. Is that I will say one thing that you realize of this generation, and he talks a lot about this, it's the period of regional filmmaking. So maybe this is jumping ahead to what it says about San Francisco part, but people are starting to make movies not in New York and LA. I think, to be honest, this has a lot to do with breaking up Hollywood's union infrastructure, and that regional filmmaking becomes popular because the writer's strike happens around this time, which I'm sure you remember that, Tosh. And so, again, it's maybe this is the way neoliberalism works. I'll be a little generous to him, even though he works in film. But, and I mean, Moonlight's very Miami. I think Beale Street is, obviously that's New York, but you start to see this period where people are making films in other places, and it's what do you call that, like not the chicken or the egg kind of situation, but it certainly opens up random cities to being in the 2000s, like Pittsburgh becomes a shooting destination, Albuquerque, Atlanta for sure gets built up. I mean, you could probably think of a million other places. So some of the authenticity of San Francisco does feel like that is also what's grounding it, is that it's not New York or LA, and particularly New York for mumblecore indie movies. So, you can take that.
Which is intriguing because there is this sort of moment where he does say, or he doesn't actually say it in this, but it comes out in the conversation that's on the disc, is that it was also contemplated of shooting it in like New York or Chicago. So,
oh, interesting. Huh.
I think that there's those peculiarities in the film, and there's so many different ways that people experience a city. And I think that you get a particular sort of sense of what kind of city Barry Jenkins knew it as, especially as someone who was like transplanted for a very brief period of time by the time of actually like making the film. Because as much as I appreciated the like housing rights committee meeting, which on the disc version, like for the credits, there's a screen that's just dedicated to HRC, and like again has the website for HRCSF, and like to learn more about the struggle against gentrification in San Francisco, visit this website. But there's like not any Black housing justice people that you could have featured. Or even I think like the lab. I feel like this was around one of the times when like the Redstone Labor Temple that the lab is in was kind of going through its sort of shakeups with various like changeovers in ownership. So like, you could have dropped in on a tenant meeting there, which would have been a broad range. Also in the Mission, much more broad range of faces, because you had to see like anti-gentrification meeting as all white people. Like, I guess, I mean, sure, you definitely have that, but
yeah, like Hunter's Point, could have gone to Bayview, and generally, yeah, you would think in the Mission they could have found some people of color, but maybe just they were working with the Housing Rights Committee and they didn't have any non-white people working for them at the time. As far as like plot wise, like it is a meandering date that they're on. Some of the other places they go to the Knockout Mission past Cesar Chavez or
it's across from El Rio. It would have been Army back then. Which one are we calling? I mean,
I know. Yeah, has it been renamed yet? There's more like music discussion, like TV on the Radio being the only like indie band that includes some Black members. The Moldy Peaches had someone, but any other plot points that we need to address?
There's a Bill Cosby impression.
Oh, right, yeah.
Which was one of the two improvised moments, by the way, according to Barry Jenkins. I mean, obviously this is before like people really knew, but I hated Bill Cosby when I was this age when this was filmed. I was much younger than them, so I'm like, I think
I thought it was
better.
Aggressively on the nose for like the context of his general imposition to be like every Black man has a Bill Cosby impression. I said, oh, huh.
You thought it was ominous foreshadowing?
I mean, also forgot. Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was like really self-aware, actually. But I mean, the other thing that I was going to say is like in terms of plot points, they also go to Yerba Buena, which is intriguing, sort of again in terms of the remaking and remapping and sort of like art washing of the city. But then I was thinking too about how the thing that they go into at the MOAD is like their slavery exhibition, which is from a bygone time in MOAD's era, because like they don't have like standing historical exhibits anymore. It's like the kind of idea that they would be going in to listen to a slave narrative being narrated and like sitting. See,
with the Goethe quote too. I like that.
That was, I was like, yeah, I mean, this is perfect. Like you have these Black children playing on this postcard with a Goethe quote underneath. But also, I mean, I think that was the sort of like the silhouette shot in that scene I appreciated. But I think, I mean, at the very least, because of in comparison, in juxtaposition to the film we watched for our last review, I was like, even if it's like some kind of a strange kind of love for cinema, like I can tell that Barry Jenkins
Likes
genuinely
movies.
loves film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I give, yeah.
And Yerba Buena Gardens, the park in Soma where the Metreon
Never hang
is
out
next
there,
to it.
though.
It's, as Didi was like
I'm not going to
alluding
MOAD,
to,
but
it is very close to
MOAD.
MOAD,
Yeah,
but it is like
it's that same little triangle.
Yeah, that
like
same
the
little
Jewish Art
triangle.
Museum was there,
and all that area was formerly, I believe, mostly like Filipino and
in the
redeveloped.
60s, right? Yeah, it was during urban renewal.
Yeah. Things like the MOAD were like the city's offering.
There's also another line that really stuck to me, and I think this is very much is like what I wrote about in my book, which there's an old episode on. Is he says something like, "Oh yeah, my folks used to live in the Lower Haight when it was nothing but black folks and white artists," and he says it very good, like, "Oh, that was great." I think it doesn't feel like the artist is a gentrifier to him, which is very much the hipster. Again, she's not on it, so I'll say something Rala said. She can file a cease and desist or something if I say the wrong thing, but she said something like, "Oh, when she and a few other folks saw it, they were like, oh, these are the people we had to make fun of," which I do think is true. Even as I was youngish when this came out, like maybe 19 or something like that, or 20-ish, and like I made fun of hipsters all the time. I was like, these are like entitled people. They don't have any reflection about the fact that they're part of the gentrification they're complaining about, or that, because it was pretty obvious then that things like, even for people, Toshin, my age, like that expensive coffee places or fixed gear bikes, because now biking culture is part of gentrification, that like bike lanes and stuff, regardless of, riding a bike is a good thing, whatever, environmentally, all that stuff. But a little after I moved here, I remember like the bike lanefication of San Francisco, like
totally the bike coalition. We should do an episode about how it's been a super right wing.
Yeah,
I mean the way that Yimbys took over the bike coalition, and then the Sierra Club also in town, specifically to greenwash their crimes. Maybe he meant to do this, like the contradiction of like saying that the MOMA is too highfalutin to go to.
Yeah, it's old, maybe oldish money, but maybe
there's obviously sub-thought put towards like art as gentrification force, like the fact that she's dating the white curator with no art on the walls, versus the t-shirt art that she does that has a little bit of a political something to it, in that she's printing women directors.
Feminism.
True.
So it's funny because her films were all really working class, like Barbara Loden. So what happens to a artist where people are like, "Oh, she's woman," and it's like they're holding up her art with, I don't know, I can't really think of someone that's an upper class film. I mean, I guess Claire Denis came from a very affluent family, like, so it's like but it's
weird. Like Loden and Greta Gerwig.
Yeah, okay, that's a good example. Yeah, where it's like they're not really doing
Lena Dunham,
Lena Dunham. Yeah, and it's like I mean, not to like white women, but like it is true that like even amongst white women there's class, so it's like but they all become kind
Ava DuVernay.
Yeah, it's very
if you really throw in just a hodgepodge, just get some color on there. But I mean, I think there is a way that there is a sort of self-reflexiveness there, and in terms of like pointing out how much of just a kind of dickhead he is, because for all his raging on and on about like dating white people, you're dating that cracker. I love that the scene that I love, the plot point that actually is kind of like a muted plot point, is when he finally gets his stanking ass in the shower, because he's trying to get into bed with her, and she's like, "You ain't showered all day."
Yeah.
Like last night, today, you ain't showered not once. So when he goes to the shower, or when he goes to pee, one of the two, she like goes on his computer and sees, one, that he like looked her up on MySpace, which he just kind of like passes over, and then two, clicks on his photos and sees it's like a photo reel, like like a photo strip of him and like this white woman, and it's like I wish my heart could be sewn back together, or like it's like the text that's like scribbled over it. So then that's the nod. It feels kind of like theater like in that regard, was like, the different things that characters do and don't know that the audience is privy to.
Yeah.
Yeah, where it's like, oh, so this whole time
I mean,
he was getting off at the mouth. Yeah.
I mean, he's kind of, sorry, mixed company, Tosh, but he's very much like a Nigcel, like, online. So, like, he is, like, because the other thing is,
took her bike back.
I mean,
when I was like, oh, what a loser. He's like,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's my ex's bike.
Also,
yeah, I gave it to her, so I took it back.
One thing we have to talk about, too, that was very pervasive, which is very Obama-coded, too, because it's before Obama, is that there is, which is very central to this film, is there also is this idea that the most persecuted Black person is the Black nerd or the Black emo kid. This is very pervasive online. And you're like, you're just like, first of all, I don't know how he's paying his rent. Like, because it's like, yeah, the TL was cheap, but I'm like, as a bike messenger, I mean, Toshi would have been like an adult and lived here around this time. Like, yeah, I don't think you lived alone in a studio if you were a bike messenger and just could literally fuck off the whole day. Like, he didn't do it.
Sell an aquarium.
Oh, okay.
Aquarium.
So he's,
remember,
like,
he's the number 2 aquarium salesman in the city.
Yeah, I don't think anyone who did these things, I felt like everyone I know who did jobs like this had roommates. I mean, for all the like, we're confronting class things, that really bothered me, where it's like, I'm not like the kind of Black person you see on BET. I was like, well, thank God, because I'd change the motherfucking channel if I had to deal with your ass. You're so fucking whiny and annoying. Like, I was, it's just, I mean, it was very big energy at that time, which is part of gentrification, because it's also like, oh, those loud ass Black people at the hip hop club, they're persecuting me as like a Black indie person, and you're like, you're dancing with white supremacists. I feel sorry for you.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. This is actually that's what intrigued me, because he does have the line where he's like, everything about being indie is about not being Black. And I was like, but there's nothing more DIY than Black, like that. That's like,
he could take that. He could, Black. Yeah, he could take that approach. Yeah. And it's also just the thing is like, I don't know if this is your generation would have had this, but it definitely existed in mine, where it's like, I'm the Black anime kid, and you're like, bitch, everyone watches anime. Like, what? You're not so fucking original. Like, it's just it's like that. A lot of his character,
it's repeating now. It's actually intensified now because of the internet.
It feels like that meme.
You're like Twitter, really.
What's the meme where it's like, nobody knows I'm something something?
It's like that meme. In the corner.
Yeah. Nobody knows. I think it's called the nobody knows meme. Like, it's just very like, okay, dude. Like, he was like, so like which is very central to hipsterism.
Totally.
I have really detailed notes about this that I don't know how long we're trying to go, but like, where it's all about, it was all about curation. I think one thing I noticed in looking at the films that led up to mumblecore, is that because it was about people who went to college, I don't remember if his character is supposed to have gone to college, but one could totally read a critique of American college post 90s, 2000s in that there are no political issues because we learn about them in school. And so nothing really is going on beyond that. Everything can be kind of reduced to a book, like a book on my shelf, a record. This idea that because hipsters are so self-curatorial, it's like, or curatorial, they're like, oh, all the records on my shelf, I got to be careful, like, oh, I only have this, I wouldn't have certain movie or magazine or book. But I also think it says a lot about why there are no political grievances of that culture, because everything is sort of reduced to a subject you learned at college or a niche interest. And so it is, to your point, even the music thing, he's like, yeah, it's not a politic, but a lot of people, it is their fake persecuted identity. A lot of Black people, that are like, oh God, I'm the only Black person at whatever, some artist show. I was going to say Paramore, but I feel like there are a lot of Black people like Paramore, but like, whatever, it kind of music. I'm the only Black person at da da da. And you're like, this is it. There's something intentional about the way you're staking out this identity. And that's your own issue, but stop trying to make it a political thing, because it's not a political project to be a fan of whatever. And if it is, then there's some questions there. It's kind of white identity politics, I think, or something like that.
Feels Gen X coded to me. I don't have like an explanation of why necessarily, but I do think of, like, you want the things that you've curated to stay niche. Once Modest Mouse is in the top 40, then you do away with the Modest Mouse album. And this is around the same time as like vintage stores, I think,
Oh,
were
yeah.
on the rise. Like before that, like you had consignment stores, but like vintage started getting really big around this time. And also collecting vinyl records, I think
Oh,
of
yeah.
like
That was me.
these like niche collections of things.
Coffee, everything was like that. Everything could be, like nicheified.
And it's all about just like being super different. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like it's all about being anti. There is no real kind of politics that's pursued other than being like not X, not Y, not Z. The bit that I was gonna say is that it's also like becomes something of a necessity to kind of like position oneself in that way. Because there's also like a sort of, you don't want competition. You can't have competition for the one Negro position in the industry.
Yes.
Because I mean, I
Yeah.
think that's actually something that kind of endures now. Sometimes, like,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I worked like 60+ hour a day job, day and night job for most of my time coming out of school, and then through the pandemic. So I just wasn't really going out like that. But I remember once I started kind of going out into like nightlife again, just experiencing something that I hadn't experienced in a really long time. Again, since like going to a predominantly white university, where there are always those people that really enjoy that position. Like that's their bread and butter. Because
Very Bay Area.
I have aggressively refused to sort of like play that part. But there was like there was like the queer trans kind of like artsy kind of literary society, like Greek letter literary society on campus. And I remember when they tried to recruit me to it, I was like, I refuse. Like, you all start to dance and they surround you like you're circus animals and they're watching you, or like they act like they're out on safari, when you're like, oh, see how those Negroes move. And I think that there are some people that really do enjoy that position and also recognize the precarity of it. There is actually only room for one. And because it doesn't have to be that way, because that's the whole thing about it. There's like, a cacophony of people, right?
Yeah.
Who are saying that online, like, I'm the only one. It's like, no, like you're trying to be the only one. Because if there's all of you who are the only one, you could simply get together and do your own. Especially since it is like an indie thing. It's not like a whole, we're trying to start an empire. At the same time, it does sort of belie the fact that at the end of the day, there is a certain cultural, not only just cultural, but actual like genuine capital involved in these enterprises. That, some of these people are really just playing the part, but could connect you to one thing or the next. And you're waiting for that, that ticket. So you don't want other Black people around in case, they threaten you for the ticket that might be there for the person is just kind of like playing the role. Like the person who really does live in Bernal Heights, and just throws the ragers.
Well, because it's also like to know that person. Like I lived in Bernal Heights, and it was like, I think it's also what you're saying too is very true of a lot of this kind of era, also 90s, like you were saying, Tosh, grievance cinema, where a lot of it kind of is about wanting to be accepted by white people, or implicitly, like you're pointing out, Didi, I think, or like or it's like the grievances of like navigating in predominantly white spaces. No one's making you do that. Like and it becomes a form of oppression because no one's making you go to Bryn Mawr or whatever the hell the thing is. And because it's always addressed to white people or to like other privileged Black people, there's never a reckoning with the privileges that person has. Like with him being like, oh, we have it the hardest. The people you see on BET, I still can't get over that line. I was like, man, I hope he gets hit by a bus. Because to have the gentrification analysis and then kind of, it's like, that's equivalent to like your weird hipster identity that you've really aggressively tried to self-consciously cultivate. That obviously, like, he had a white girlfriend. So it's like, oh, you are actually very similar, which I'm guessing the person Barry Jenkins was dating was white. I don't know, or something. Like, seems like why add that? His wife is Asian. I know that because she's a filmmaker. She made that one with Awkwafina, The Funeral, the one where she didn't have an accent. But it's like his thing where he's like, in the cab home, he's like, you only ever see a black person with a white person. You never see a black person with a Latino person or a Latino person with an Indian person, which is also not true of the Bay. Like, I mean, it's famously kind of mixedy or whatever you want to call it. That's not the proper use of that. But I'm like, I see lots of vaguely ethnic couples or a black person dating an Asian person or a Latino person dating an Asian person, whatever. Like, you just see that a lot. It's such a weird, I mean,
I
in
still
maybe
thought it
certain
was
circles. Yeah.
true as like the kind of thing that you would say at the time, though, as a
Yes,
hipster,
that's
like the wanting to
yes.
stay niche. And
And
I
because
mean,
you're complaining about white people in a hipster space. You're oriented that way. I think you're right that
right.
that would be said. Yeah.
But at the same time, you appreciate that you are one of few. I mean, I sadly, part of the reason that I moved to Portland for college was because I was like, I'll be that one Asian. I don't care. The school that I went to was like 90% white. And I was like, yeah, I'm happy to be that one. There was like a desire to like stay niche and like to stay not winning, I guess. You want to, cut off the bottom rungs to the ladder as soon as you've climbed up to the fifth or sixth rung. Sadly, I feel like that was very much present in my life around this time. So some of those conversations like read true to me as someone who was hanging out with hipsters at the time, as somebody who wanted to be like the gaysian, the solo one and only gaysian in a group of like mostly white hipsters.
And also, like, it has to be said, like, these are the people that determined that outlook determined the entire cultural sphere, like, after Obama. It feels like everything is like that. Like, everything is representation. You don't see black people in X, and it could be like the worst thing ever. And it's like, well, I'm actually happy that we don't. And again, I think it's very related to this kind of politics of complaint thing. There's not a honest accounting of like the world you want. You're just kind of like implicitly want to be part of the world that I think most people would be critical of. I think most people think of now hipsters are like they're hella racist. They're like, which a lot of other mumblecore movies, they're like there's open racism and class antagonisms against actual poor people as opposed to people who are quote unquote broke, which I think also became such a big term around that time. Like, oh, I'm broke. I'm after college, and it was like your parents are the CEO of Gillette or something. You're like, I don't think that counts as broke. It became under Obama that year. It became like we have to think about what these black artists are going through. And you see this, people will defend a black artist that's famous more than they're defending actual black people. And it's like, oh, I see. You don't really care about black people. You care about this black person who is the black celebrity. It's the black Pele. It's the old Brazilian example of Pele, or the Michael Jordan, to the Do the Right Thing reference, or Magic Johnson. I forget which one they reference. And it's like that becomes anytime a moment of black so-called visibility, which this movie comes out right the same year Obama gets elected, right? That's the thing. People love Obama. If you're a black person who's criticizing him, you're gonna hear everything. You're gonna, like we'll use racial slurs. We don't care. You ain't Obama. So it's like it kind of becomes the politic.
I do think it's like a pretty decent picture of this hipster, like Gen X to millennial age group living in a city like San Francisco, a gentrifying city. Would each of you say that it's a good depiction of that era?
I think for sure. And when I moved here, which was a little after the movie came out, in particular in black art scenes, this type of attitude was so common. The other irony of this is a lot of the like quote unquote precarious alternative stuff was pretty sedimented by then. It's kind of like the punk to business owner, Vivienne Westwood trajectory. I think by the time I moved here was that, but I definitely saw this attitude trickle into like art, black art spaces. People were very much like this. They're very much like persecuted black person in the space. I would often try to reach out to collaborate with something. I'd be like, oh, I do music. You do a film. I'll do the music. Not interested. Is also a very individualist period. It kind of feels like a lot of the discourse points, unfortunately are very accurate. Like hipsters were also about like, oh, we're the ones that gentrification is targeting, and it was like, not really. Which I do like like I said, I really like the Tommy scene because it feels like you do get some perspective. Like, oh, there are other people getting pushed out that, you know, may or may not, whether or not consider Tommy part of that group. Like they're talking about like, oh no, poor Black people in the Bayview are getting pushed out, not fixed gear messenger bike guy who's, you know, refuses to talk to those people because they look like they're on BET or whatever.
Didi, any last thoughts, conclusions, comments?
So one of the things that I was going to say is that in the interview again, the like filmmakers breakfast interview that Barry Jenkins did at the London Film Festival not long after this premiered at South by Southwest, I want to say is where it had its festival premiere. The interviewer asked him, was like, you know, so like which character do you identify more with in the race problem debate? And Barry Jenkins was saying that, you know, he's like, oh, you know, but I understand both sides of them. I understand both sides of the debate. Yeah, you know, I'm somewhere in between. I'm somewhere in the middle. And I mean, I think that there's constantly something that happens where Black people can find themselves seeking some sort of refuge from Blackness. There's a sort of kind of idea that we should be able to be post-identity, and that it's just so much of a prison, which is what's so funny about it, like performing all these very kind of aggressively carceral kind of gestures, you know, like the fact that Mike is more or less just like a cop. I wrote down that, you know, like if this was present day, Mike would probably be a cop who would be one of those cops who uses Flock to try to like track down a date, but then like wouldn't do it because, you know, he's trying to like keep the moral high ground, but then secretly he's already been that cop, you know? So like, I guess, you know, since, you know, has the whole like white partner, like white girlfriend
I like
thing.
it.
So he would be at all the city hall meetings about opposing Flock, but like, truth be told, he was once a cop who was using Flock cameras to, you know, spy on a one night stand.
Flock watching.
So, yeah, he was Flock watching. So for all of those, for all of the ways that this film is at certain points, like really pressing up against certain things to do with Blackness and gentrification and the indie spaces. Like, I think it can be read against itself decently well. I think that I just don't get that sense in terms of like, especially Black people from the city. Like, they're just not the type that are going to be like, oh man, you know, I really just wish that I could fit into this like indie space. Like, it's so
also how the
sad.
Bay
It's so
is.
hard for me.
Yeah. Like there are a lot of, yeah, it is. That's a good point, actually. Yeah.
Because I think actually there is like a decent amount of pride that I think that like Black kind of alt and Black kind of like indie people take in each other. And I mean, that's the sort of scene that I for surely grew up in. I was more on the peripheries of it since that was my jock days. So I was mostly in the pool swimming. But I was constantly seeing and constantly encountering, because I had friends who were tapped in with it, like, you know, those sort of collectives and those circles of artists predominantly. And, you know, Jemma, you made reference to them. And I think it was less about this question of like the indiness, but it was actually to go back to what you were saying about the like white artists, you know, and Black people and white artists in the lower hate, is that, you know, art is a very capital intensive industry, and it's also a really debt riddled industry. So if you don't have the like cushion, and if you don't have those sort of connections, and you're unwilling to do that like elbow rubbing and ass kissing, it's going to be very difficult for you to be perhaps the artist that you want to be. And I think that does in some ways explain Barry going from this to something like a Moonlight and a Beale Street and, you know, whatever is next. And why so many sort
Also
of
did
like
that
Black
Lion
artistic...
King movie.
Oh yeah, I did not realize that. Yeah, my bad, not to cut him out. And it's intriguing because he was saying actually in this interview from the London Film Festival that he was poised to do like a different adaptation of a novel or of some literary piece that I think just never actually ended up panning out. But I mean, it's like that's the problem. The sort of flux that is like constantly imposed. And I think that is in some ways kind of an absent presence in the film, which is the sort of like restlessness of Black communities out here, constantly sort of having to contend like endlessly with the fact that like to be Black is to be marked in a very particular way. And there's no amount of dancing around it or dating, a white curator or some other white girl, or like being in an indie scene that's gonna, allow you to sort of bypass that or get around it. But I thought it was just, I guess the last thing is that it's like really strange that it kind of gives itself this sort of peculiar denouement in the sense that it's, I think, the gentrification meeting, the shots of the city, like that montage of shots of the city, and then the ending when she like rides away on her bike, that are the only ones that are in full color. And it's almost, I don't know, it felt like too promissory. It felt
That was definitely a Wong Kar-wai move.
Yeah, it felt too resolved for a film that otherwise was like pretty suspended, in a suspension that was odd to me, sure, but I thought like was working for what it was.
I think there is an aspect of mumblecore that I was saying earlier that's kind of like the business card into the business. And there's something about it that's supposed to feel so authentic. It's very much like the Bay, right? Where there is like a lot of authenticity discourse, more so than, I don't know, I lived in New York really briefly, but it feels like authenticity discourse is a very big just mystification project in the Bay Area. Like we talk about this gentrification all the time, and all the groups that do stuff, like we see all these weird, like no bippin groups, and it's like all Black people, and you're like the kind of the astroturfing. But I think there is an aspect to a lot of mumblecore, and maybe this is also the strange part about having a Black person do it, is that it really is kind of like some of its roughness is literally just like, look what I can do with no resources, and give me more resources, let me in the business, so which, worked for him, it seems like. But yeah, to your point, like, well, okay, why doesn't it have a more meaningful point or even argument or something? And it's like, well, he probably was like, what, we did enough here. Not that he had to resolve anything. I don't think the movie could.
Painted a picture.
She could have broke up with her white man. She could have broke up with her white man and
give up that Marina house.
Didi, did you tell your mom that you were going to watch this?
Yeah,
I did because I used her DVD copy that I got for Christmas. And I mean, I think that is actually kind of like part of it, is like sort of trying to think through. I mean, both of my parents just like don't come from money, and I think were encouraged to go kind of like white collar sort of routes to sort of position themselves in a particular sort of way. It's such a strange cultural artifact to reflect on, because in some ways it feels like, yeah, certain dimensions of it actually still endure, and others probably are like worse, because you have actually probably more opportunity for people to do Black collective things, but it still continues to be these really small pockets with really like politics of Barry Jenkins suspension between like, I hate that people see me as Black, but the only way I can cut a check is by insisting on how Black I am.
By the way, if you're in San Francisco on the 27th of August, come hang out at the main library, the Hormel Center, at 5 p.m. We're going to be watching Screaming Queens, the documentary that was co-directed by Susan Stryker, who has been on the podcast a couple of times. Come learn about Compton's cafeteria riots. Didi and I will both be there. And again, if you're not already subscribed, please go to patreon.com/sadfrancisco to support this podcast endeavor.